Good morning, and welcome to A Conversation for Change, a community-led discussion about race, justice, and prejudice, with voices from teachers, law enforcement, city leadership, and the faith community. Our panelists today will be Chad Bianco, the Riverside County Sheriff, Michael Vargas, the Mayor of the City of Perris, Heather Jones-Avila, Assistant Principal of West Valley High School, Jose Luis Ramirez, Senior Pastor of Real Christian Community Church, Wade Forde, District Pastor of Lake Perris Seventh-day Adventist Church, and Perris Fifth Street Seventh-day Adventist Church, and Connor Smith, Lead Pastor of Temple Baptist Church in Perris. All right, welcome to the conversation, everyone. So without further ado, let's get started. The first question I have is for Pastor Wade and Pastor Connor. Let's address the main topic that is on the forefront of everyone's mind during the cultural movement we find ourselves in. What are your feelings on Black Lives Matter?
You know, Councilwoman, that's a really great question. And I think that it's really important that we create some clarity around Black Lives Matter. And I would kind of answer the question this way, because I think most get it when this answer, or at least this expression, is given. And that is when the white rhino became endangered, and we saw that there was a potential of it becoming extinct, they added it to the endangered species list. Now, the truth is there's lots of feelings about Black Lives Matter because it's been so politicized and taken over sometimes by the wrong factions. But the truth is that when the white rhino in Africa was put on the endangered species list, that was not to deny the value of the giraffes. That was not to say that the baboons and the monkeys and the cheetahs no longer had meaning and had purpose to the ecosystem and to just the beauty of the landscape of the safaris. But it was to say, for whatever reason, the white rhino was being targeted at a greater rate. So in order to ensure its longevity, to ensure its contribution to the ecosystem and to the landscape, it needed to be protected in a different way, such is the case of Black Lives Matter. That's not to deny, obviously, that all lives don't matter. It is to say that for some reason, which there's varying answers to that why, systematic racism, injustice, but the reality is that all lives won't matter until Black Lives Matter. So just to create clarity, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it's not to be conflated with Antifa or any other group, but it is to say that this specific group is losing their lives at a much greater rate than others, and to ensure that its contribution, its value, its beauty continues, that Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I would just add to that as well that, I mean, you can't really stand by the phrase all lives matter until you can unequivocally say Black Lives Matter. No one, at least no one that I've seen, is saying only Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter more. They're simply kind of waving their hands nice and high and saying, hey, we matter too. And as humans, and I would especially add that as followers of Jesus like myself, I just don't think that ought to be a controversial statement. To add an exclamation point on that, I think when Jesus gave his famous Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew, and he says, blessed are the poor, and blessed are those who mourn, that wasn't to say, blessed are those who are comfortable, or blessed are those who are happy. It was simply to say that there was a problem with those who were poor being seen as less than or not as important, and Jesus says that way of thinking is wrong. And so I think we could think of it as Jesus saying something more like, blessed are the black lives, for they were created in the image of Almighty God, and therefore have intrinsic worth and value, and they matter to me. And then on the other side of that, kind of touching on what you said with the organization of Black Lives Matter, I would simply point to the two men sitting on either side of me. I mean, we're all pastors, the three of us are, but we're three pastors from very different Christian faith traditions, which may hinder a little bit what we might be able to do if we were on the same church staff. That probably wouldn't happen because maybe our theological differences would be too stark. But I promise you that if Jose's house is on fire, or Wade's house is on fire, or my house is on fire, neither of us are going to care who's passing us the bucket to put out the fire. And so I would say that while some work with Black Lives Matter as an organization may be somewhat limited, we can link arms to accomplish a common goal for the common good.
Does anyone else want to weigh in? If not, we'll go to the next question. The next question is for Sheriff Bianco. What do you already have in place as an independent review process to investigate potential police misconduct? What does the current accountability structure look like for Riverside Sheriff's Department? And is that structure sufficient, or do you feel that there are ways it could be more robust?
That's a very detailed question, and it's got 1,000 different answers. But it really, you have to take a look at when you're saying police misconduct. That goes, as far as we are concerned, that is any type of violation that violates our code of ethics, our code of conduct, our policies or procedures. So that could be something as simple as they were out driving and ran a stop sign and someone complained, and then up to something criminal. So each of those individual things, based on what is going to be the consequences of those of that violation, that determines who is reviewing that. So something that is very, very minor and simple, that's a simple policy procedure, usually that is left to the captain of our individual stations or our bureaus. If it leads to something where it could possibly be anything criminal, that obviously is overseen by the DA's office. They have the final view of that, so they are the final reviewer of something like that. Any policy that may not be criminal but yet still could lead to termination, the final reviewer of that is me. So it doesn't matter what station it comes to, anything that has the potential of termination is reviewed by our Internal Affairs Bureau within our admin division, and then I am the final reviewer and the final say on something like that. So it really depends on what the allegation is, what the misconduct was, and it leads anywhere from our Internal Affairs Bureau to the DA's office. For something criminal, not necessarily criminal, so I didn't mean to say that, but we do have we're in the process of getting all of our different city police chiefs, not contract city chiefs, but city police chiefs, together with the district attorney's office, to where we have a combined shooting review board. So any type of, and we're calling it our force investigations unit. So whether any type of use of force that a deputy or a police officer in the county is involved in, it will be handled by this one specific team, overseen by the district attorney and myself, and it will be, so the perception of the police investigating themselves. By nature, if you're going off of writing, that's what has to happen. For a criminal violation or for a criminal filing, the police are investigating that. I get the real issue that I have with that is the problem and the lack of communication between the leaders of our law enforcement organizations and the communities, to where that trust factor is that we're doing the right thing. The perception is that we're all protecting ourselves, protecting other police officers, when the reality is there's nothing worse for me or for any other law enforcement officer than a bad cop. So the good cops in our departments despise the bad cops, because you as a person, you're seeing a uniform, you're seeing an agency, you're not seeing that individual person, so you don't even recognize them. You just see that uniform. So that uniform did something bad, so that means all uniforms do something bad and that we're all protecting each other. And it doesn't necessarily work that way. It doesn't work that way because we do everything we can to weed out the bad, because it makes us look bad. If I have a deputy that's doing something wrong in the community, toward the community, that makes me look bad, not just that person. So as a whole, we do a pretty good job. Are there things that fall through the cracks? Probably. Is it enough? Probably not. I mean, we have, what I would prefer in our agency is that none of the individual stations do their own investigations, that it's all controlled through an administrative bureau, through all internal affairs. It comes down to a money issue with that and a personnel issue. And we just don't have the resources. So detectives and lieutenants and even captains at stations take that responsibility, that added responsibility for those investigations onto their normal duties. I think it would be best if we had one independently trained or part of our internal affairs bureau that's all they're trained for is officer involved misconduct, and then they don't have to worry about any of the other outside distractions.
All right, moving right along. The next question is for Mayor Vargas. What does the city's current oversight of the police look like? And if it doesn't already have it, would the city of Perris be willing to establish its own independent commission that can investigate potential police misconduct?
Thank you. So we don't currently have any oversight because we are a contract city, and that's the duty of the sheriff to oversight his own employees, as you just explained. But to take it a step further, if we were to create an independent commission, would have any findings from that commission would have no merit. We do not have any authority to discipline or recommend or anything of that nature to the sheriff. So you could have one, but it would play no role in what goes on with the sheriff's department, and that's the big difference between having your own city police department versus being a contract city.
What is the, just because I don't know the background of that, what is the reason, or what would be the reason for having a sheriff's department contract city versus having a police department?
Well, the first answer would be is funding.
Okay.
The city of police department, the city of Perris had its own police force at one time. This is before I even moved into Perris. They disbanded back in the late 90s or mid 90s, I believe, somewhere in there. They had a lot of internal issues going on, and that's when they switched over and had the sheriff contract. And then there's a wide variety of benefits that come along with a contract city, and we'll talk more about that as we go on.
I'll add just to expand on that just a little bit. So no matter what, cost, you cannot have your own police department that is cheaper than the sheriff's department. If it was possible, everyone would already do it. So it's the other way around. When cost is a factor, and if a city has all the money in the world and it's not a factor, and they want their own police department for the pride of saying we have our own police department or for whatever reason, then that's usually what they go with. If it's a funding issue, anything like that, then obviously it is far more economical for the sheriff's department. What comes with that is if you are an individual police department, you may have 60 police officers, and if something happens that you need more help, and I'll use for instance because it's right now is the protest that we had in downtown Riverside that ends up turning violent, and the city of Riverside did not have enough police officers for 6,000 people that potentially violent and destroying downtown. So if you only have 60 police officers in your city, you're limited if something bad happens or if a major investigation. With the sheriff's department, you have 4,000. So it doesn't matter that you're only paying for the certain amount of service that you have. It's still, you're contracting with me for services. So yes, we have to come up with an economic value of what they're paying for the city, but the things that go above and beyond that, the helicopters, the gang teams, everything that comes with a large organization, you have the benefit of that you can't necessarily afford, again, with your own police department. There's pros and cons to both. Cost for benefit is by far, the sheriff's department is the better deal. And that's why there's so many people that contract.
So he opened that door that I was going to talk about later on.
I forgot to tell you that I talk too much.
So, obviously the sheriff is right on target. And if I was the city council and the mayor choose to go and start our own police department, he's absolutely right. With a town of 75 going to 70, 79,000 people, the federal ratio is 1 cop for every 1,000 residents, or 10,000, 1,000.
One per thousand.
1 per 1,000. You're supposed to technically have 80 cops, just to say, out there, you know. Well, that's not going to happen off the back. Right now, as a contract city, we have the helicopter, we have the SWAT, we have all those specialized units. You're not going to have that. You start off in, we won't be able to afford to have a helicopter at the back. So what I'm just saying is, all those benefits he's talking about, if you're on your own police department, those are going to be added costs to starting a police department. And unless we're Beverly Hills, I mean, we just don't have that kind of money.
All right, moving right along. Mrs. Avila, what is your position on the value of police in public schools?
Thank you for that question. I believe that having SROs on campus is very valuable. I've had amazing experiences with my SROs on campus at Perris High School. I'm now in Hemet, and I have amazing experiences with my SRO there. I think one of the things that needs to happen, however, is the information. I think the role of our SROs is misunderstood on campuses. As an administrator, I've never been told, this is what your SRO is for. And so there has to be a bridging of the knowledge gap in working with our officers on campus. The kids don't know, they just see police on campus. They see the same police on campus that sometimes might arrest a family member. And so there's a knowledge gap there. There's a relationship gap there. We have amazing deputies. I've never, ever had a problem with the police, and I've been in Perris for a long time. Been here for a very long time. Never have I ever had an issue with the police. But many of our students have. Many of our families have. And so our school, especially here in Perris High School is the center of the universe here. So our families are there, our deputies are there, everybody's in this small space. But I don't think they know how to interact. I don't think they know what their roles are and the benefit of having the sheriff's department on our campuses, in our community. They don't understand. I don't think our families, much of our community understands what that benefit is. I find you all very valuable. I find the police absolutely valuable, but many of our families don't. And that's where we need to bridge that relationship gap, and that's where we need to bridge that information gap.
I think you said that perfectly, and I think that especially law enforcement, for forever, we've been our own worst enemy, and that there is no communication. We don't communicate at all. So obviously we have not communicated with administrators of what the role is. They have not, for them too, they have not communicated with us, whether it be they're afraid to ask, or we don't want to bridge that gap, or we're just not going to tell because we're the police and we don't do that. We just, it's all right here and we know best. So I think that you hit that right on the head, that the communication is where we have really failed. The dialogue of just sitting down and asking questions and then being able to articulate what we're doing and what this is for, and then us as a group of administrators and law enforcement communicating that to the kids, that's where we failed. It's not that we failed in anything that has anything to do with something happening on campus, because I've overseen our SRO programs in Moreno Valley. That's a very large one. I've never had a complaint of us being there or things that we did wrong. It's usually always praise from teachers, from administrators, from parents. But there is that other part out there that we don't hear about, that they don't necessarily like or trust the police. It's because we failed in that communication and that relationship with them. And moving forward, that's where we have to fix.
But in all of us, for example, as a classroom teacher, I invited my SRO to talk to the kids about drugs and what drugs are popular, how they work, all of that, marijuana, the pens, and all of that. And I was a Title I teacher, so I had the low socioeconomic kids. None of my kids enjoyed the police, but they enjoyed that presentation with that deputy. And their conversation with that deputy was much different after that presentation, because he wasn't in there as the police. He wasn't in there pointing the finger or criminalizing anyone, but he was informing and having a genuine dialogue with those kids, and the relationship changed. And that's what needs to happen with our families as well.
So as a former and retired school police officer in Los Angeles, that is a very important role on our campus. They're not on elementary level, which would really be vital now, because now we have to start hitting our youth 1 through 5, and that's a big major factor. But it's going to be difficult to justify a police officer on an elementary school site. But the relationship, as a school cop, you're not just a cop. You're a dad. Mm-hmm. You're a brother. You're a counselor. Mm-hmm. You know, you're everybody, and that communication is very key. And having that relationship with all those kids on those grounds helps build relationships with law enforcement. But as the sheriff indicated, there is that 10% that, you know, it just falls through the crack, unfortunately, and that's the ones we need to focus on and work on. I worked in schools and some rough areas in LA that are associated with the projects. Sometimes they're literally inside of them or right next door to them, and you know that's not it's a very uncomfortable position to be. Obviously, they know who you are. You're in uniform and you're dealing with a lot of these gang members and stuff. But the parents appreciated us there because we were protecting their kids. We were the link to making sure those children were safe on that campus, and it's just. It's a major role, just as law enforcement, our municipalities, and having school police on the campuses. You know, it's just a vital link for all of us.
One thing I want to say that for the school resource officers that we have, and as I'm sitting here thinking of it and the lack of communication and we don't talk, I oversaw it in Moreno Valley for a long time, and I dealt with the school administrators there, and I never told them, I've never had a conversation of how we pick a school resource officer. Mm. And we don't, when we decide who's going to go into that program, trust me, that's not an easy decision because you have law enforcement officers. I mean, all of us have a different personality, mm-hmm. and there are personalities that shouldn't be dealing with kids. Mm-hmm. The Joe Fridays, only the facts, and the stone cold, you know, I'm just here to do my job. That can't be a school resource officer. We have to pick the dads and the deputies that have the ability to talk and to mentor, and they may be the parent figure for some child that's in that school. And we think about that when we pick them. But I've never told anybody that. And so I don't know if the school districts know that there really is an effort to pick the right fit to go into that program, because it is different. It's a different assignment. It's a different type of person that has to be there.
Pastor Jose, did you want to weigh in?
She didn't say that out loud, but she was actually her deputy's teacher.
I would like to add this. I think through the schools, the relationship they have with the deputies, cops, I really trust the message is being clear, and the effort to establish a relationship with the students, so students can see the cops as mentors sometimes. But there's a different view many students have, because from young age, many students had heard from their parents conversations, wrong examples about the police or the deputies. So when students are in school, they receive the message, they can understand how to establish a relationship into the trust factor, but when they come back to home, they see the image of dad, the image of mom, and they remember the bad experience of Uncle Joe or a cousin suffered through what we're seeing today at this time. So how the student, my question is, how that student can help their parents, or just ignore the parents and just to grow and to continue trusting the police department, the deputies, or how a student can help the parents, their siblings, to change their perception and start trusting the police department.
We have to start leading with a growth mindset. Like you said, we have the kids in school, and they know how to build relationships with their deputies. They know how to work they work these relationships out. But there are so many adults in schools now that come from a deficit mindset. They see kids that are Black or that are Latinx, and they say, ooh. Or you see your little cholo kids or your gangbanger kids. some kids are doing bad things because that's the only example that they have, like you just said. So we're looking at them with the deficit mindset rather than what are the good points about this kid? What are the benefits of having this kid? My God, this kid is so articulate, but they're a gangbanger. If we work with the benefits of them rather than the deficits of them, then those things can change. And the kids can come home and say, well, that wasn't my experience with Chief Bianco. That wasn't my experience at all. He's a great guy. And you should come to the school and see him because he's there all the time. That would make a difference. That would change the way those relationships go.
Let me jump in and say, I think that our educators and our educational system has a greater role to play in developing the mindsets of the future generations. So if the SROs on campus have the kind of intentionality to operate beyond bias and be able to connect with the diverse landscape, then those kids develop the kind of feelings towards their police officers in the future based on their experiences while they're in high school and junior high school. Why? Because educators and the educational system has more to do with the outcome, I would dare say, than the outcome of our children, oftentimes than the parents, because of the amount of time that our kids are on in academic settings. So when those SROs are intentional about creating a feeling and a perception for the young people on that campus, I think it has the potential to affect the future as they become business owners and entrepreneurs and doctors and lawyers and all these different things after they move on, because they'll never forget the SRO that they had when they were young that helped to create the impression. Now, different for me, that wasn't my experience in junior high and high school, which impacted my perspective, and then it only got worse and got worse. But had I, in the early stages of my development, had a different experience, which mine was not connected to my family members, uncles and cousins and dads, it was personal experience. So when people tell me that there's only 10%, some people would argue, well, is it just that 10% that we seem to be coming in contact with? Which is such a small group. I long for the day that my experience with police officers helps to reshape my perspective, which I hate to just give kudos, but the city of Perris, I have to be honest, has been an amazing place for my relationship with the sheriffs in this particular area, because they've been absolutely awesome. But I think education has a critical role to play in the future development of the mindsets, the perspectives, and the outcome feelings of the young people who will become the leaders of tomorrow.
Can I piggyback real quick? And Pastor Jose, that's a very difficult question to deal with. And I've seen it both ways, where in an affluent area, the kid is doing very well there, but when he gets to school, he puts on his bully hat and he's a tough guy, or he's a gang member, tagger. And it's the other way around, where some kids live in a bad neighborhood and they are bad and tough when they're with their buddies, but as soon as they come to school, they are a Johnny Good-Go student. Mm-hmm. So it's communication. It's always going to be that word, but I'm tired of hearing communication, that we need some action. But we still always have to communicate before. But it's a very good question and a difficult one to address, because there are many different factors involved, and that's where the school resource officer is involved. A school psychologist, a pastor, a teacher. Teachers hold a lot of weight on our kids, and I've got 4 daughters, and that last one, if she came home and told me that Miss So-and-so said the sky's going to be blue tomorrow, she believes her, and I don't care what Dad tells her, she's not going to believe me because I'm not her teacher. Her teacher said this. So the schools have a lot of impact on our kids as well.
Pastor Jose, this question is for you. We know that racial bias is not limited to just the Black community. What do you see as the current feelings within the Latino community towards everything that is going on right now?
Thank you, Councilwoman Rita Rogers. That's a very important question. And let me start my answer saying this. The first time and only time that I had been in front of a judge has been when I was granted my immigration status. I was a very young man back then. The judge, well, I've been paying traffic tickets sometimes, but the serious facts of life has been only once in a court. And the judge was saying, young man, I see you have the ability to succeed in your own country. I don't see why you should be here or why we should grant your immigration status. So when he was saying that, I thought I was going back to my country or I couldn't stay here. Suddenly, he changed his tone and he started saying, but I believe this country will be a beneficiary having you in this country. When he granted to me that my immigration status, I embraced this country. And I learned to see every people in this country, not by the color of their skin, but with their values, their integrity, and their character. I come from a country where I learned from I was a child to survive. And coming to this country gave me great opportunities, and I embrace it. This country gave me my wife. This country gave me my two children. And as a Hispanic and Latino that came to this country in my young years, I take pride to represent my Hispanic community and my Latino community what I consider the right way. To answer that question, it's a very, very complicated question in this regard. Let me put it this way. The origins of these racial conflicts has been present for generations. This is not a new topic. The root in present-day racism resides in the supremacy that has been fed for decades. We are trying to abolish something that is not new. And this supremacy is not found only among the white people on these days. But we can now see the racial bias in every ethnic group. Within Hispanics, we learn, because back a few years ago, even in the Hispanic community, we were very racist. We will criticize each other. The Hispanic community has a tremendous gift. It's the only ethnic group that has different colors of skin. There are white Hispanics, brown Hispanics, black Hispanics, and we are learning to celebrate our differences. We are learning to see ourselves as one. But it has been a difficult road. Every time there's a conquest, there's a battle to fight. And there's people that will get hurt. That's what we are seeing in this time that we're living. I would like to add this. As Latinos, as Hispanics, why we feel, how do I see the things that are going on right now? As a community, as a Hispanic community, we feel connected with the black community, and I will rephrase this. We feel connected with the black community because we ourselves have experienced many acts of racism and racial bias. For example, Latinos have suffered police discrimination many times in different ways. Latinos have suffered language discrimination. A lot of times they had discriminated me because my accent is tough. But that's my personality. English is my second language. But let me tell you something. I will make sure my message is across, and I will not stand accepting that I cannot succeed or I cannot do my best. When I have a mouth to speak, I will raise my voice to speak.
Amen.
In the Hispanic community, that's why we are protesting. That's why we are out. That's why we are raising our voices. Because it's not only about the black community, it's about everyone. And we had suffered discrimination in the workforce. We have suffered discrimination in housing, voting discrimination. Sometimes Hispanics go to vote. You have your immigration status? Are you a U.S. citizen? Because they see the color of the skin. During these current events, the Hispanic community is also marching for change and equality for all. Because Black life matters, brown lives matters, white lives matter, and resuming because all lives matter. We are here to represent only not my Hispanic community. I'm not here only to speak for my Latino community. I'm here to speak and to say that we have a voice and that we need changes. We need reformations. We need a change so the trust factor can be repaired, it can be restored in every single ethnic group. Thank you.
Thank you. And we see that demonstrated now with our protesters. I was a 60 protester, and it was limited to black folks protesting back then. But now every single ethnic group is coming forward to take up the mantle, and that's the difference. So hopefully that will bring the changes that this conversation is trying to help with as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Just a couple of things. When we say we as a country, correct? Not just we as Perris. Because I think Perris is a great city, and I don't see a whole lot of issues, or people aren't just coming up and saying something, and we can dig into that a little later, unless Chad says something. But just a funny story, and I'm not trying to contradict what you said, Pastor. Everything you said is right on, but it was funny working in East LA in a predominantly Hispanic community, and I'm a Hispanic cop, and I pulled somebody over to give them a ticket, and the gentleman says, "Why am I picking on the raza? Why am I picking on Hispanics?" Well, I'm sorry, I'm Mexican, and this is a Hispanic neighborhood. So show me where the racism is in there, and that really bothered me. And a lot of times law enforcement gets that bad perception for that reason. But just want to throw that out there. But everything else that you were saying was right on. Thank you.
It's true. If someone is stopped by a police for a traffic violation, if it's Hispanic, hey, he deserved that ticket, or for whatever reason he stopped. But I have family members, they have been stopped just because they look different, or they were riding in the community they don't supposed to be driving or expected to live in that community. So I have family members going through that experiences. At the same time, I have a niece that's half Mexican, half black. She's 5 years old, and she says every time the grandmom asks her, "So, what's your how you express yourself? How do you describe yourself?" She says, "Grandmom, I'm Mexican. Grandmom, I'm black." So we don't see her as half and half. We see her as a human being. Yes. And every time I speak to my sister, which is a single mom, I tell her, your daughter, she will achieve many great things. And I have, sometimes I worry because of the things that we are seeing right now, but thank God that she's still young and someone is fighting for her right now. That's right. By the time she grows up, let's pray that she can have a voice, not only to blacks or Hispanics, but to every person. Yeah. Believe me when I said this, the Hispanic community has a lot of good things But within the own community, we criticize each other. We don't help each other the way we're supposed to help. But at the same time, we are learning to become together. And the protests that we are seeing right now, besides the Black community, the Hispanic community is up there. It's up there. Besides the Black community that has suffered so many racism in this country, the next community is the Latinos and the Hispanic community. Has been almost 1 year, last year, November of 2019, in El Paso, Texas, there was a shooting, and the reason, what promoted that shooting of a young white male of 21 years old is to kill, and he described it, I want to kill every Mexican. And that hurts.
Yes.
Because what happens if I am in the wrong street, on the wrong time, in the wrong store? Because of the color of my skin, I will be in danger to not come back to my house. So that's something that we really need to keep working. And what started right now, let us not get finished with no changes that's supposed to be done on this time that we are living.
All right. Sheriff Bianco, thank you. As you know, qualified immunity is a legal doctrine in United States federal law which shields government officials from being held personally liable for discretionary actions performed within their official capacity, unless their actions violate clearly established federal law. What is your position on qualified immunity for police officers?
I don't know why I keep getting these big, broad questions with multiple answers. Qualified immunity is there for a reason. And while I get the arguments on both sides, I have to be in favor of it. Exactly how it's written, do some things have to change? Maybe so. But the purpose of qualified immunity is that will have to stay in place as long as we have, if we're not going to reform our legal system to allow for frivolous lawsuits and to, for things that you can sue somebody for anything. The way it is written, if a government official does something outside the scope of their employment, outside the scope of their duty, illegal basically, there are no protections from qualified immunity. But if you're doing your job, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you're doing the things that, based on your policies, your procedures, your laws, then it's basically protecting the person civilly from lawsuits. Now, think about if, how are we ever going to have a cop? There will never be anyone want to be a law enforcement officer if you're just going to get sued and then you're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your family, you're going to lose your livelihood forever from a $1 billion lawsuit that you really did nothing wrong other than a jury said, oh yeah, you did, you shouldn't have done that, even though it was completely legal. So as long as you're doing something legal, qualified immunity prevents someone from suing you outside in a civil court of law with the potential of losing everything that you're working for. Outside of that, you do something illegal, you do something wrong, there are no protections. If you're going to violate the law, violate someone's rights, and you blatantly do so outside of your legal parameters of your job, then you're on your own. And not only criminally, but then rightfully so civilly. But to say, even in any government official, not just a law enforcement officer, but there has to be that protection from frivolous lawsuits. And maybe they're not even valid, and you're never going to lose that lawsuit. But when you have to defend yourself, pay the attorneys for 10 different lawsuits just because somebody decided, an old girlfriend decided she didn't like you, and she got all her friends to file lawsuits against you that now you have to defend. There would be no one that would want to do anything in government if that's how we operated. And that came about because of a litigious society that was suing for everything. And I think it's a needed It's definitely needed. Could there be something adjustments to it, or that wouldn't be up to me, but that it quite possible. It has its good and it has its bad. The perception of it is, you're protected no matter what. Well, that's not really the case. The reality is you're not protected if you're not doing the right thing.
Do you mind if I make just a small comment? Because a lot of what was shared is absolutely accurate. There's also other sides to the same protection from minor infractions and old girlfriends. I think one of the realities of qualified immunity, it also creates almost the impossibility for civil lawsuits for a federal employee to be held accountable for acts of violence, because one of the part of the definition, the description of this particular policy is that without a shadow of a doubt, somebody has to actually prove that the infraction is the exact infraction in the exact context, in the exact jurisdiction, and has to prove a history of that. The inability for people to gain access to the kind of information that empowers people with justified cause. Now, we're talking about justified cause because I agree with you when it comes to frivolous lawsuits. I mean, the money to be able to fight those things is almost impossible for the common person, even if it's a police officer, to be able to defend themselves. But the reality, and part of the problem, which is why qualified immunity is coming up today, is what it does is it creates a barrier, financial barrier, information barrier, jurisdictional barrier, provable barrier to the common person be able to say, hey, what you did to me was wrong, not justified, and how now do I indemnify myself, and what do I do to ensure that somebody else doesn't experience the same thing? So when we look at Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we look at the incident around my brother George Floyd, we see that the same police officer that murdered the gentleman also had 12 other cases that came against him, but they were not able to go further because of qualified immunity. So while I agree with many of the sentiments, there's an other side to the same story, which is why that same police officer was able then to accomplish the detrimental task of murdering that gentleman, because qualified immunity protected him from so many other infractions that they could not prove, because there were small I's or small T's that had not been crossed or I's that had not been dotted that protected them. So I agree, while simultaneously I think that we need to look at the overall scope of qualified immunity and find ways to ensure accountability structures that, yes, if you're doing wrong, you could lose your house. Count the cost, Scripture says, that we would know in Luke 15 what we are getting into, to know that we don't ever, which doesn't happen often, but there are times enough that it does, hide behind our badge, because the accountability is you could lose everything if you're taking advantage of that power. So while I agree, I think there's other parts of the lens that need to be shared so that people understand that qualified immunity, while it has its benefits, its cons are massive and overarching and create difficulty, if not impossibility, for the kind of accountability that is necessary during these days and times.
I don't necessarily disagree, but the case in point to this, there's no protection for doing something wrong, and there's no qualified immunity does not prevent anyone from suing the Riverside County Sheriff's Department or the Riverside Police Department or any other individual agency. It doesn't prevent that. It just, and then during those cases, if the county or the agency or the judge decides that what you did is outside your scope of employment, then now qualified immunity no longer applies to that individual. This particular case, and if this is a highlight, and I don't know anything about the 12 complaints that he had before, what they involved or anything like that, but shame on the police department. If there was legitimate complaints about this person that he from a cop, he has no business being a cop. No business being a cop. Shame on that department for not taking action on that on those 12.
Yeah, I would just say the same, that was my same intention I wanted to say, was that I hear what you're saying, and what the sheriff is saying is that you're both right on spot, but in this particular matter, which we don't know what those 12 cases are, that's the same thing I said too. Because there's no way that I would still have had a job if I had 12 complaints against me on file. I mean, like the sheriff said, and I agree. Shame on that police department. Shame on that administration for allowing that to go on so long, to the point that it cost this man's life.
Yeah.
You know, too bad there wasn't phones back then when they probably first started. I mean, cell phones with cameras.
And I don't know if we can answer this question, but how do we get to a place where we get to stop saying, shame on that guy, shame on that officer for doing that? Again, I've never had an issue. I had one, he had a bad day, and he came to my house to take a report, but he had some coffee and he was fine afterwards and took my report. But for other people, my husband, he's not had good experiences with the police. And we had Perris police back then, so, you know, it was a little bit different. But how do we get to a place where we don't have the opportunity to say, shame on that police officer or on those officers or those deputies for allowing that to happen, or shame on that police department for not catching that? If you're shooting people and killing people and traumatizing people in such a way that, and you're not, there's no ramifications behind it, how do we get to that place where it's not okay anymore?
That's a hard question to answer. It is. And speaking of questions, unfortunately, because of time restraints, we're not going to get through the rest of the questions. But we have one final question, and that I want everyone to weigh in on this question. We've talked a lot about different factors. We've talked a lot about the racism. We've talked about the educational role, mentoring our young people, because they really are our future. But here's a question for each one of you. What are the ways that you can see that we can rebuild broken bridges of trust within our community? How do we rebuild the trust?
So, as a mayor, and I would assume my colleagues on the dais as well, we need to start, we can start with continuing dialogue with stakeholders, just as what we're doing here now. And the other thing that I believe personally is a great tool, and it started from being as a school board member, what they have in schools, and that's a community or a parent liaison.
Mm-hmm. Parent liaison?
Engagement specialist, I forget the exact title. But what I brought forward and requested to staff at our last meeting was that we start to look into having a pilot program to have a community liaison. But I want that liaison to be a liaison between the community and the mayor and the council, not just to go to city staff. We need to know what our people are experiencing, what problems they're having in our community. And to me, that would be a viable tool to help bridge that gap. And that community liaison could also be connected to our schools with their parent community liaison. Parent engagement specialist, that's the title.
That's what we do.
And, you know, and there's your connectivity there, but we have to continue the dialogue. And when we say that, and this is a perfect example, you've got education, you've got council, you've got law enforcement, you've got faith-based organizations. Probably we can maybe add a community member too as well, but that would be my first take on this.
I think coming together. When I was at Perris High School, the city of Perris had the Grow Perris movement, where we had the community gardens. My experience with that was phenomenal, in that we had our faith-based organizations coming in, we had our police or the county sheriff, they were there. Coming together, people eat. And our mayor likes lettuce and salads. So that was, for me, a big Plus, we came together, we ate, we shared a meal, and everyone was in the room. Parents were in the room, Black parents. Perris is 89% Latino, so our Latino community was there. Some of our Black community was there. And that coming together to share a meal, to share a conversation, makes a big difference. If we can eat together, we can do a whole lot of things together.
You know, I think it's very easy in times like these to throw out the words that everyone wants to hear. Conversation, movement, you know, whatever it is, it's easy to throw those out there because you're going along with everyone. There were so many, this captured a nation and at some point even the world. I mean, this was international protesting and everything else. This wasn't just a city, or it wasn't just the United States. It didn't happen here, but yet we had massive protests here. So a lot of times in this conversation, I've heard that every 20 years, I mean, people are going back, back into the 60s, then the 80s, then the 2000, and now it's 2020. And it just happens all over again, and then we have conversation. It's like sooner or later we have to do something. And I think this, as horrible as it is for Mr. Floyd to die, if you take away, I mean, I saw a man killed by a bad cop. That's what I saw. And I saw a couple of cops standing around there that did nothing to stop it. And then I also saw a bunch of people standing around that filmed it. And as horrible as all of that is, it highlights major problems. And if we come together as one, if we stop being the Black community, the Hispanic community, the white churches, as soon as we stop labeling ourselves as all of that, and we come together as you look at us and you say some passionate, qualified people that want to make a difference, instead of, oh, there was a white pastor up there and we had a Black pastor. He's a pastor of a church doing fabulous things. Why does it have to be a Black pastor? Is it people? Is it Americans? He came here to better himself as a person and for the opportunity as an American. And maybe as America we make the difference and we finally get past the whole, the history of what's led up to this. But communication, do we communicate? I mean, in the last couple of weeks, I've had a whole lot of people tell me their opinions and that I'm wrong. And there's no communication. There certainly isn't communication. It's a directed dialogue that you're supposed to believe. I don't think it's communication. I think what you just said with coming together with food, if that's what it has to be, everybody likes food, but it's a relationship. It's not communication. You have to have a relationship because you can have a husband and wife, completely different political philosophies, and they're still loving husband and wife. There's no difference because they have a relationship. They're not communicating. They have a relationship. And I think that's what we're all missing. We don't have a relationship with each other. And whether it's a racial bias or a law enforcement bias where people don't like me because I'm a cop, strictly because I'm a cop. They don't know that I'm a great dad. I mean, well, I hope my kids think that, but we put these things that we see visually instead of what we see internally or what we feel internally with our hearts or our heads, where we're not having that relationship. And I think that's the whole relationship thing is what has to change, not talking.
Very important. And 18 years ago, we formed the Cops and Clergy Network here in Perris. We've been meeting monthly ever since then. So we have those relationships with law enforcement officers, with the pastors. We have that ongoing dialogue, and I think that's very important too. Pastor Connor?
Yeah, just before Pastor Wade jumps in, I'll just give mine real quick because I want to. So I agree and I disagree with something that the sheriff said because it can't just be conversation, because if it stops at conversation, we're never going to go anywhere. And I 1,000% agree with the position on relationship. when we try to affect change outside of relationship, it's just never going to work. As a pastor and somebody that is an evangelical, I'm never going to have a conversation about some of those topics in evangelicalism or the Bible outside of relationship, because then it just comes across as superficial. However, I would say that Wade and I's relationship a week ago was an extremely superficial one. We did not know each other very well. It started with me calling somebody that I actually did know was a black pastor, because I know that this black pastor has a completely different lived experience than I do. And I wanted to hear that experience because I don't know the things he's gone through. I've never had to sit down with my children, and I'm never probably going to have to sit down with my children and tell them how to have a conversation with a police officer, because I was raised in a way where it was every cop is a hero, right? But I have family members that are black and Latino who have had very different conversations with the police. It's not that necessarily they're bad guys, but it's you need to be very careful and watch your step around them. And so I would say even what's happening here today started from nothing more than a conversation, but it walked away. It ended with what is an actual action item we can take. And so I would say that it can't be just conversation. It has to end in relationship. But then from those relationships, I would just challenge people as they continue to have these conversations to walk away with an action item. And I just wanted to read a quick verse from 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, and I think that's the thing we've got to come back to, I'm a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. If I give away all that I have, if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. And I saw something a friend put up the other day, and he said, if I speak against the sins of murder, violence, and racism, but don't have love, I'm nothing. If I speak against the sins of theft, violence, and property destruction, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I speak in support of law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line daily to protect their communities, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I speak in support of my brothers and sisters who are mistreated and wrongly discriminated against because of their skin, but I don't have love, I'm nothing, so on and so forth. And then 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 8 is the last one I want to read to you. And it says, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. And I don't think there's a greater example of that in the world than Jesus, a man who was innocent, a man who was dark-skinned, a Middle Eastern man who was mistreated by the authorities. He was arrested for no good reason. He was brutally tortured. He was executed for a crime he didn't commit. And I think if we can learn to follow the example of Christ and seek to have more conversations like this where we sincerely listen, especially to the voices of the marginalized, and then have actionable items that come out of that, I think we can see true change.
Thank you. Pastor Wade.
First of all, I'm so grateful for this conversation that we're having. And I think when it comes to rebuilding the bridges that have been broken, destroyed, burned down, however you want to phrase it, I think we're acknowledging the need for reconciliation. We recognize that reconciliation doesn't happen without conversation. But it goes beyond just good conversation. We also have to be considerate of ensuring that we are putting things in place so that we don't have to recycle these conversations in 2040, right? So that at our 20-year margin, when our children have taken over, that they live a different experience than the ones that we lived. It's unfortunate that my mother, who marched, and my great uncle, who was Martin Luther King's security, she tells me of the exact same stories that I'm experiencing now in reference to the cycles that seem to continue without being broken. So while I believe that the need of reconciliation starts with conversation, we also have to put in actionable items, not just items for discussion, but policy changes. One of the ones that I think that would be of value, at least for us to consider on some levels of conversation, is out of an organization called 8 Can't Wait. 8 Can't Wait references, and it shows the restrictive use of force of policies can reduce killings by police and save lives. And there's there's 8 of them that they recommend, and I just want to put them out there, and that is the banning of chokeholds and strangleholds, the requiring of de-escalation, the requiring of warnings before shooting, requires and exhausts all alternatives before unholstering their weapon, a duty to intervene by all, banning shooting at moving vehicles, requiring the use of force continuum education and training requires comprehensive reporting, and I would add number 9, cultural competency training as a mandate and as continual education, so that we can truly see each other not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character and the beauty and the diversity that is contributed by each other because of their uniquenesses and their differences. Differences aren't bad. They are essentially just different. And that different is what helps to create the kind of landscape where we can look at the painting of our lived experience and really be able to see all of the variables and say, wow, how beauty is that? It's not what I would have painted, but my contribution brought the blue, and yours brought the red, yours brought the pink and the purple and the orange and the green. And when it was all said and done, we could admire the work of humanity when we truly move beyond just good conversations into actionable items that empower us to be able to do the very things that help me to see my brother as we become in a very short period of time. So I encourage, I challenge that we would be intentional about becoming aware of each other's lived experiences and journeys that are different and unique. And in that, we would seek to listen, not justify, rationalize, but accept that each other's journey is each other's journey. And it brings value to the table of conversation by which we all get to sup and we all get to eat, because everybody likes food.
Pastor Jose?
Thank you. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., we are not satisfied and will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like a water and righteousness like a mighty stream. When we speak from a place of hurt, we will create toxic environment. When we speak from a place of hurt, we will create negatives environment in our families, in our communities, in our cities, in our states, in our nation. The way we reproduce the right message through our actions, the way we express our opinions, respecting everyone else's opinions, is what matters. What it matters, and that will bring change. If we speak with respect, if we speak and we communicate and we eat and we do things with the right reasons, even if other people, they don't agree, but we learn to respect each other, in 20 years, as Pastor Wade said, in 20 more years, I believe my niece will be living in a better world in 20 years.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for being here today, sharing your heart, and participating in this wonderful conversation for a change. Thank you very much.